In today's video, we're going to be going back to basics. We're going to be talking about the setup for a mid-iron. This is part of a series, and this is aimed at golfers who've got into bad habits, golfers who are returning to the game, or perhaps a beginner golfer that just needs to know the basic setup for a mid-iron. Stay tuned for more info. Welcome back to the TruGolf Academy. You've joined me, Jon Watts, today at Branston Golf and Country Club. Today's video, as I said, is part of a series. I'm calling it Back to Basics. It could be for a beginner player, absolutely, but it's also relevant for those golfers who just feel a little bit lost, who are struggling with this particular part of their game and want to just get back to basics. As I mentioned, perhaps golfers who are returning to the golf after having a bit of a layoff and finding it difficult. Just some simple tips that you can take to the driving range, the practice area, and then onto the golf course. Today's video is all going to be about the setup, and I'm going to be focusing on a mid-iron here, a 7. I'm going to be then doing another video in this series about how we change the setup for different golf clubs. I'm going to be doing one about back to basics with the grip, and just also some general bad advice to ignore that you will get from other amateur golfers up and down the driving range, practice area, or perhaps your buddies out on the golf course. So let's get into it. As I said, today's video is going to be about the setup for a mid-iron. So I'm going to be focusing on an iron here, a 7-iron, and then in another video I'm going to be talking about how we would change that setup for different golf clubs. Are we changing our ball position, our handle position, etc. When you're starting the game or you're getting back into the game, you're generally going to be starting again with a 7-iron, a mid-iron, just to get yourself back into it. So that's what I'm going to be starting this series with. So I have put down an alignment cane here. So we're going to be saying that my target is the pylon in the distance in terms of a far distance target, and I'm going to be using this cane. Now I am going to do a video on back to basics, talking about the alignment as well. I have done some other videos on that, so if you're struggling with aim and alignment, I'm not going to cover it too much today, but check out this link. It could really answer some questions for you about aim, about alignment. It's a really vital part of our setup, but I'm going to breeze over it today as I have filmed that before. Please check out the link to do with aim and alignment in a Break 100 series I've filmed before. So today's video, as I mentioned, is about the setup position, width of stance, weight distribution, ball position, distance from the golf ball. Questions I get not just from beginner golfers, not just from those returning, but golfers who just feel a little bit lost with it. So hopefully this will answer a number of questions for you. So what I like to see first of all in terms of width of stance is around shoulder width apart, but that's a little bit vague, so let me go into more detail with that. If I dangle the club from my shoulder blade, I'd like it to be going to the middle of my shoe or the inside edge of my shoe. So it's either going to be the center or the instep of my shoe here. It's not going to be to the outside edge of the shoe. So as I dangle the club from my shoulder blades, it's either going to be going to the center of the shoe or just on the inside edge of my shoe there. Generally taller guys, people who are swinging it quicker, are going to need a little wider stance for perhaps a little bit more balance. If we go too narrow, what we tend to see is excessive body movement, swaying off the ball, or a lack of balance. And the golfers would have to slow down their swing. So we see a lack of club head speed, a lack of distance. If you get someone who goes too wide, although they've got lots of stability, they're going to really struggle to transfer their pressure from their back foot to their front foot. You can think of it as weight transfer, but pressure is really about how we use the ground, how much force we're applying through our feet to the ground. So I prefer to talk about pressure than weight transfer. So width of stance, as I mentioned, shoulder width to the middle of our shoe or the inside edge. Ball position. I would like for a 7-iron here, a mid-iron that I've got, the ball to be quite central in my heels. And it's important to say it's in my heels rather than my toes. So I would start the routine by pointing my toes at the golf ball. The club shaft is looking in the middle of my feet, and I'm going to make the same step out with both feet to keep the ball quite central in my heels. The reason I'm saying heels rather than toes is another part I want you to do in your setup is then flare your lead foot. So your lead side is this part that's nearest the target. I want you to flare that lead foot out towards the target, pointing that toe out by a good 35 degrees. What that helps us do is rotate our body, and it puts a lot less pressure on our ankle, our knee and our hip, so it's really good for us. It helps our body twist and it puts less pressure on our joints. Now you can see, because I flared that toe out, the ball that is center in my heels isn't central in my toes, so it's centered to my heels, not my toes. That's the second part, the ball position. The third part is going to be the distance I am away from the golf ball. It's a real key part, and if you've watched some of my videos before, you'll see me do a check that I've done, I guess, since I started the game, something I believe in. I've heard other opinions and other checkpoints, but for me it's always worked for about a handspan gap from the end of the club to my body, and it's a checkpoint I'll use. So I make sure the ball is in the center of the golf club as I'm doing that, and I try and get the club flat to the floor. So I'm trying to get the club sole to the floor. If I'm going to be either way, the toe of the golf club is the part that's furthest away from the shaft. I wouldn't mind to seeing that toe of the golf club just slightly elevated a little bit up in the air. Only a fraction, so you should be able to push almost a 10 pence piece and get it a third of the way along the toe of the golf club here. I won't go into the boring detail of why that is, but really it's just the bowing or the bending of the shaft on the downswing that is going to cause that club to flatten out a little bit without going into more detail there. So flat to the floor or slightly toe up, the ball's in the center, and I check for that handspan gap, end of the club to the top of my thigh. So 4 fingers without my thumb gives me a good checkpoint from the end of the club to my body before I open my feet apart. So that was number 3, it's that distance away from the golf ball. I would then open my feet to shoulder width apart. The ball is in the center of my heels before I flare my lead toe out. In terms of posture, which is point number 4 that I want to get onto, and I would just go through some of these in terms of a checkpoint or checklist, just to see which ones you do correctly, which ones you need a bit of polishing up on, and try and become a bit of, or gain a little bit of a routine where it's in your mind, it's tick, 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 done. I'm now ready to hit the golf shot. And you will get quicker and quicker as you go through this. So posture and where my weight's going to be, because it's really affected by my posture. So once I've got my feet the right distance apart, the ball position correct, the right distance away from the end of the golf club, my posture is going to be a tilt forwards from my hips. It's important to be hips rather than up here my waist, because if I tilt forwards from my waist, I look something like that. If I tilt forwards from my hips, you can see a very different position, a very different spine angle. We're trying to get into an athletic start position where we tilt forwards from our hips and just soften our knees so our pressure is even between our heels and our toes. So a great way to do that is lift our heels, lift our toes, lift our heels, lift our toes, and try and find that bite point, try and find that middle area there where we feel balance, that we can move. In a lot of sports, a lot of racket sports, receiving serve in tennis or badminton, we'd want our pressure into our toes so we can move. In golf, we're not moving our feet, we are rotating our body. We want our pressure to be very much even, heel toe. Now I've got a great way for you to get into that setup, that posture if you struggle. So legs locked, hold the club out in front of you. What we're going to do is just soften your knees, not flex them, just soften them so they're not locked. You're going to bring your arms down so your elbows hit your chest, and then you're going to tilt forwards until the club hits the ground. Okay, that gets me in a great setup position. That also gives me the distance I am away from the golf ball, so another good checkpoint there for you. So I feel in a great setup. You can see the ball's a bit too far away here, but I feel in a great setup position, very athletic. My pressure feels very even heel toe. Now the last point I want to talk about with our back to basics setup is really about where our pressure should be towards our lead foot or our trail foot. With a mid-iron, I'd quite like to be very even heel between our heels, toes, and our left foot, our right foot, our lead side, our trail side. If we're going to favour either foot, because we're trying to, with an iron, strike a little bit more downwards on the golf ball, we'd start with a little bit more pressure under our lead foot. So I'd get that setup position correct first. The ball's in the middle of the club's pretty flat to the floor. I've got that hand span gap, feet apart to shoulder width. I'm going to flare my lead foot out. I'm not going to go through that routine each time. That's something perhaps I would do on the driving range or at home to get me into the right setup position. I'm going to get that same feeling of tilting from my hips, just softening my knees, okay? Before I grip the golf club there. My pressure feels very even heel toe. I'd be quite happy with 50-50 left to right, but if I'm going to do anything, I'd favour my lead foot just a little bit here at around 55 or 60% to help that downward blow. Something I see with a lot of golfers who are very strong on their right side, weak on their left side, if they're a right-handed person and player, is they tend to be setting up with too much pressure on their back foot. A good way for you to get into this is that same routine I was just doing. So as I hold that club out in front of you, I want you to focus on something in front of you that's nice and level. Soften your knees, bring your arms down to your chest, and then tilt forwards. So I'm getting myself centered, so I'm not tilting already too much into my back foot. I'm trying to get my pressure even, focusing on something in the distance before I tilt forwards. It encourages you to go through, as I said, a checklist with this. So if I'm going to have any practice swings, I'm having them first. I'm picking my target that I'm going to aim for. As I said, talked about alignment in a different video, check that one out. So now I'm into my pre-shot routine. Point the club where I want to go. Toes pointing at the golf ball and the club's in the middle. Hand span gap end of the club to my body. Feet to shoulder width apart. Flare my lead foot out. And I'm going to go through that routine. I'm going to level myself, feel very even between my left and my right and my heel and toe. I'm going to soften my knees, arms down to my chest, and tilt forwards. You can see I'm just a little bit too far away there, so I can creep in. So that's a great checkpoint for me. I now feel in a good athletic start position to start my golf swing. So that are the key fundamentals I would go through. Let me go ahead and fire one mid-iron away there, so you can see a slightly downward blow. You will see a ball and a divot. Importantly, that divot occurred after impact, which is what I'm really looking for, not before impact. It's a little deeper than perhaps I'd normally go. The ground conditions are quite soft at the minute, but my routine really helped me get that setup position. If it's something you're struggling with in any parts of that, those checkpoints, those checklists that you can sort of think to yourself will really help you get that setup position nailed. If you can get a good setup position, it's a great foundation to the rest of the golf swing. As I said, make sure you check out that video I've done on aim and alignment, and check out the rest of the series to do with the grip, to do with the setup position changes for different golf clubs, and some bad advice to forget or ignore that you will hear day in, day out from your amateur partners. Cheers guys, we'll see you soon.